This is a picture of from the Dresden Codex, which is the document that allowed them to crack the Mayan code and know that that December 21st, 2012 is the year, or is the moment that the calendar ends. The Mayan calendar is just a series of days. It's like 11,800,000 days that began somewhere and ends at some point. This is the document. It looks something like, well, this is from the Dresden Codex. These carvings up here are like numbers. We're going to look more at Mayan writing later in the class, but these are numbers right here. This is actually the number 13. 1, 2, 3, and the lines, the vertical lines are 5, but they're also, so it's 5, 5, and 3, which is 13. But they're also broken up into different epochs. Like this is a compound number. This is 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, and perhaps 1, but they're different divisions of time. So it actually could mean this 2 could actually mean 2 cycles of 10,000 days or something, and this is 3 cycles of X amount of days. You'll see in the next frame how they do their writing. Now this is actually from one of the documents that was put together. We're going to look at some sections of this document in about 5 minutes, about 10 minutes or so. But this is a translation, and you'll see it says on the night of August 13th, 690, the year in which the group of the cross was dedicated, the Milky Way moved from the crocodile tree in the hours after dusk until the 3 stones of the sky hearth arrived in the sky at dawn. The reason they were able to crack the Mayan, to understand the Mayan calendar end date so quickly, is because all of these dates are referred to astronomically. So this previous document, when you see all these writings, this refers to a certain number of days into the calendar, and these things refer to different astronomical configurations. So basically what it says, to take it out of this bewildering code and in a language we understand, it would be something like, first it says the calendar is 11,860,000 XX days long. And then this translates into something like, on day 2,487,261, you had this astronomical configuration, where Jupiter was here, Saturn was here, Mars was here, and it was a new moon. And then 95 days later, you had this configuration, when this was here, that was there, this was here. And then 2,000 days later, you had this here, that here, and explain literal astronomical phenomena that is easily verifiable, because those things cannot coexist. You can't have one configuration on 690 AD and then on February 1st, 691 AD have something else that's not accurate. So there's all of these records in this document and in other documents on all the cave drawings that immediately let them know where to put this number of 11,860,000 days. They didn't know where it began or where it ended, but all you need to do is find the dates somewhere in there, and that's what they did. If on day 6,200,000 you had this astronomical configuration, then 6,200,061 you had this configuration, and it lines up, then you know the beginning and the end point. Then you just back up from the beginning and go to the end. And that's how they were able to figure out the Mayan calendar ends on December 21st, 2012. It's peppered with all of these specific astronomical configurations that cannot exist any other way, based on the specific number of days. So it's just a specific number of days with all of these astronomical configurations. So they cracked the code immediately, like very quickly after they found the codex, even though they didn't have any idea what any of the writings meant. They had no idea what all those stories were about, but they knew the length of the code, or they knew the length of the calendar because of this accuracy. So it's really incredible. It's an incredible thing. Again, I go into all of this. I go into this in a lot more detail in the course that I taught, the 10-hour course recently in Mexico. But the common mythical themes around the world relate to things like serpents and twins and trickery and a tree of life. With the Vedic people, what I'm going to talk about in this course is we see the gods and the asuras churning the milk ocean. There's this battle of good and evil between gods and asuras, or demons. You see this same kind of thing, Adam and Eve, good versus evil, versus the serpent. Adam and Eve are like twins, actually, that you'll see, versus the serpent. And then the Mayan myth, you have the hero twins versus the god of the underworld. These are all common myths. And you're going to see these symbols played out relative to all of the astronomy. So let's take a look at the Mayan, Vedic, and Christian sacred astronomy. So there's tons of common galactic plane connections in all of the stories. We'll start with the Vedic story. The galactic plane, which as I said is the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, is depicted in the churning of the milk ocean myth. There's a myth where the gods and the asuras were assembled to churn the milk ocean to get the pot of immortal nectar. And what happened is there was a pivot that was put down in the middle of the ocean of milk. A pivot ran through. You had Lord Vishnu as a turtle on the bottom of the pivot. And then the gods and demons churned the milk ocean. They grabbed a snake, they grabbed a serpent, and put it on either end of the milk ocean and churned. Here's a depiction of that. You see the gods and the demons churning the milk ocean with the pivot in the middle. Lord Shiva is sitting up here at the top of the pivot drinking the poison that comes out, that's emitted. And then eventually they got the Amrit, the immortal nectar, at the bottom of the milk ocean. And then the gods tried to trick the demons by not giving them a drink of the immortal ocean. But one of the demons was even smarter than Lord Vishnu and managed to take a drink. And then he had his head cut off. He had his head chopped off by Lord Vishnu after he managed to take a drink. And that's where the eclipses happen. The eclipses are the intersection of the sun, moon, and earth. So the churning of the milk ocean, it exists in the middle of Mula Nakshatra, and the point where Mrigashira, which is ruled by the god Soma, becomes Ardra, Shiva. So Mula means root, and the god there is called Nirati, or Kali. It's really the goddess Kali in later Vedic myth. The point where the Nakshatra Mrigashira, which is ruled by the god Soma, which is literally the nectar of immortality, becomes Ardra, which is Shiva. So along this plane of the galaxy, you have these nakshatras. You have Kali at the bottom, you have Shiva at the top, and then you have the Soma, the immortal nectar, right there as well. The junction of the of the galactic plane, that plane of the galaxy, when you look at the Vedic system of nakshatras, which are the distant stars, the plane of the galaxy runs through the middle of Mula Nakshatra in Sagittarius. The opposite point is where Mrigashira becomes Ardra, 6:30 Gemini, about that. This is where the god Soma becomes Shiva. There's a whole other myth that I talk about in the 10-hour course that I taught in Mexico that really brings this out with a lot more clarity and power as well. But this one about churning the milk ocean is definitely related to this as well. So as I said, anchoring the pivot is Kurma, the Taurus. First, Shiva drinks the poison, protecting creation, just like the heliosphere of the sun. The Asuras are first tricked by Lord Vishnu until one outsmarts him and takes a drink. As I said, there's trickery and deception with these Asuras, outsmarting Lord Vishnu after he tried to outsmart them. So we have the gods here, we have the Asuras here, Lord Shiva up here, and Kurma the tortoise at the bottom. This is Mula, this is Sagittarius. Tortoise is anchoring creation. This is the galactic core. This is Shiva, the infinite possibilities. This is where we're looking away from the center of the galaxy into the infinite cosmos. Ardra Nakshatra. This is the realm of the Devas. This is the realm of the Asuras, and they're pulling on the snake. Now here is an interesting thing that most people don't know, and it goes into the 2012 fears that people have. The heliosphere is how the sun actually protects our solar system from the plane of the galaxy. If it wasn't for the heliosphere and the protective influence of the sun, we would be incinerated by galactic matter. And we would really feel it when we pass through the plane of the galaxy. The plane of the galaxy is dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. It would kill us if we didn't have the heliosphere. Every time the Earth passed through the plane of the galaxy, like I said, it would incinerate and destroy everything on it. However, we have the heliosphere. Just like Lord Shiva, his protective energy drinks the poison. Think of this as, think of the plane of the galaxy as this. And Shiva's there drinking the poison. It's the sun's protective influence extending, drinking the poison that would otherwise destroy us, because creation was going to be destroyed by this churning of the Milk Ocean. But it wasn't. Because the sun protects the Earth, just like Shiva protects the Earth from the poison that would kill us from the galaxy. Now this is the myth of the nodes. Rahu and Ketu are the nodes. He's the one who managed to take a drink, and then he was cut in half by the discus of Lord Vishnu. The north node, the head, is Rahu, and the south node, the head without a body, is Ketu. Now what happens is when these nodes hit the ecliptic, which is the path of the planets, and the path that the planets take around the sun, particularly the sun and Earth, when the sun and moon and Earth hit the ecliptic, we have eclipses. And that's when we see the nodes of Rahu and Ketu. The Lord Vishnu's discus that cut the demon in half and created Rahu and Ketu is the ecliptic. The discus of Lord Vishnu is the ecliptic. That's what cuts the node in half once we come to Earth. Lord Vishnu is the god of manifestation, and he creates the ecliptic that cuts the node in half. The node is simply the intersection of the sun, moon, and Earth's orbit once they align on the ecliptic. So if that's complicated astronomy for you, sorry, but that's how it works. And here's goddess Kali. You see, Kali was at the base in Mula Nakshatra, and Shiva is the support. Just like on Earth, the sun is in the middle, and the moon keeps moving around. The sun doesn't move. Shiva doesn't move. And the fierce goddess keeps creating and destroying our ignorance by chopping off our heads, and removes our attachments by chopping off our arms. This is a mystical portrayal of spiritual evolution once we take form. But it's also literally played out in that creation myth, because you have Kali on one side in the form of the Vedic goddess Niriti, and Shiva on the other, at the top, drinking the poison. When we get into the Mayan myths, you see the same kind of energies represented. The plane is represented by Sagittarius, being the tree of life, because it rises up in the night sky like a tree. And the hero twins, there's a myth, all the hero twins, which is the sign Gemini, having to keep creation going by outwitting the gods of the underworld. So the hero twins have to keep manipulating and outwitting the gods of the underworld, just like the trickery that took place in the Vedic myth. The road to the underworld begins at a place where the scorpion exists at the base of the tree. Other times the boat carrying the maize god sinks when it crosses the dark rift. The maize god is born between Taurus, Western zodiac, and Gemini. So let's look at these Mayan myths, because you're going to be blown away by this. Here is a basic representation of how they represent their creation myth and how it correlates with the galactic plane. Here's the world tree rising with a scorpion at its base. Again, the galactic plane runs through about 6 degrees of Sagittarius. Right before it, if this is Sagittarius, what's the sign before it? Scorpio. The scorpion at the base of the tree. What's happening here, you see the blowgunner is shooting one of the hero twins out of the tree, and he falls in the tree. What's at the opposite end of Sagittarius, like I just showed you, is Gemini. The blowgunner shoots and pierces one of the hero twins. He falls out of the tree and then has to get on the dark road to the underworld, Sagittarius, to go do battle with the gods of the underworld. You literally have hero twins, Gemini. It's exactly the same energy. The tree of life, Sagittarius, with a scorpion at its base. You see here the world tree and ecliptic snake from the sarcophagus of the Temple of the Inscriptions. This is from the carvings at a place called Palenque in Central America. In Mayan myth, the universe is depicted as a world tree, or as the tree of life with a serpent in its branches. The serpent is the ecliptic. You see the world tree and the ecliptic snake from the sarcophagus of the Temple of the Inscription. So, world tree is what creates life, and then the ecliptic is how we live our life. The ecliptic of the snake. So it's depicted as a tree with a snake in it. This is exactly how the zodiac is laid out, like we saw in that description, with the galactic plane running up through the center of the zodiac and then all the zodiac signs aligned around it. This is exactly how the galaxy looks to us, and you see it portrayed this way. You just saw it in the Vedic story, where you have the gods and demons on either side churning the Milk Ocean with the pivot, the galactic plane running up through the center. Now you see it here with the tree of life and the serpent in the tree. The correlation between Mayan and Vedic constellations are mind-blowing. So for instance, whereas Vedic calls Taurus a bull, Mayan portrays it as a turtle, emulating the stars of Orion. Gemini is a pair of fornicating pecaries, little pig-like rodents native to their culture. This is also from the drawings at Palenque. These are the literal drawings from Palenque. You see, this is the section of Taurus. This is Orion, the 3 stars. This is actually the belt of Orion, and this is the knife of Orion. When you're in South America, or when you're in Mexico, when you're in Yucatan, you see how prominent these stars are. You see these 3 stars, and then these other ones here. This triangle, the Mayan people would emulate this in their home. It's actually called the hearthstones. They would emulate this triangle in their home and build like a fire pit in their home to cook their food, just like a Vedic yagya. They would emulate these 3 stones in their home. This is the constellation of a tortoise in Mayans. It's the same energy, though. Hearthstones, a turtle, is very similar to Taurus, the bull. It's the same energy. It's just translated through their culture. They call it a turtle. They emulate the hearthstones to bring peace, prosperity into the home. Everything we would say about Taurus. Exactly. Gemini, instead of it being 2 twins, it's 2 fornicating pecaries. This is the way they're portrayed. Right here, this is right off the cave. This is right off of the drawing at Palenque. 2 fornicating little pigs, playful little pigs. And again, this is also the same section of the sky where they have that hero twins myth I just told you about. This is where the hero twins were shot out of the tree. This is Gemini. They fall, because this is the plane of the galaxy. The blowgunner shoots the hero twins out of the tree. They fall out of the tree where the scorpion meets at the base of the tree of life. So you have Sagittarius, which is the tree of life with a scorpion at its base. Scorpio is right before Sagittarius. And this is where the hero twins are. He shoots them and they fall out of the tree here. So instead of calling it Gemini, they have these 2 little pigs. They're called pecaries. Now, when you look at Vedic astrology, it's even more specific, because Gemini is a very sexual sign in the Vedic teachings. It's called Maituna, which literally means sex. So here you literally have 2 fornicating animals, little pigs, representing the same energy. It's the same energy as Gemini. It's remarkable. It's impossible that this is just This is why I say there is no need to try to say that these cultures knew each other. They don't have to know each other. They know the sky. They know the sky is the divine matrix that creates everything. Excuse me. If these cultures were talking to each other, then they'd be using the same myths. They'd be using the same constellations. Excuse me. And they're not. They're different constellations. Because they have to do with different cultural references. For instance, when you go to South America, when you go to Yucatan, there are snakes in the trees. In fact, while I was there, one of the girls in the class had a snake fall out of a tree, almost hit her on the head. It's very common. It's not as common in India with snakes. Again, they have these little fornicating animals. They have these turtles. This is just the language of their culture, but it's representing the same energy of the sky. There's no need to try to say they were talking to each other. They were reading the sky directly. The sky is the point. All the divine cultures that read the message of the sky were going to come to the same conclusions, because this is how it works. They all knew this is how it worked. They just portrayed the same energy using the myths of their culture. There's no reason to try to say they were from spaceships or something, and they all must have known each other, and they all built pyramids, or they were just communicating directly with the sky. Here's another amazing myth. The maize god is reborn from a turtle carapace by his sons, the hero twins. So what happens with that hero twins myth, to tie that together, that same section of sky we just looked at with the turtle, this is where God is born. The maize god is born when the turtle carapace cracks open and he's resurrected by his sons, the hero twins. Again, the turtle, the hero twins in Gemini. Now see, Gemini is a zodiac sign, and those Pikaris are a constellation. There's difference. Just like Orion is a constellation, but it's not a zodiac sign. So this is why we're saying the zodiac sign is, well, the hero twins myth and the turtle interspersed, just like the turtle and those twin Pikaris. That's the astronomy. That's the constellations that they used. But this myth is what they use to convey the energy of creation. They still have the turtle, but now instead of these little fornicating Pikaris, they call them hero twins. And they have to go down and do battle with the god of the underworld in order to resurrect their father. Their son is actually resurrected because he was killed, and they brought him back from the grave in this story. It's exactly the same energy. And the maize god, again, maize is corn. As an example, in Vedic teaching, they called the Pleiades the seven sisters or the wives of the rishis. And the Pleiades is where our sun was born. This is where they say, because it's the nakshatra is called Kritika, and the god is Agni. And it's very much about the seeds of our solar system, because that's where the sun came from. It was born in Kritika, in Vedic. The Mayans call the Pleiades a bunch of corn seeds, because this is where their god was born. But it's the same energy. Whether you call it the wives of the rishis or where our sun was born, or whether you call it a bunch of corn seeds where their god was born, it's the same energy. They're saying the same thing. It's a bunch of corn seeds that gives birth to the maize god in their culture. In our culture, it's where the sun was born from the wives of the seven rishis and things like this. It's the same energetic phenomena. Here's another thing where you literally see the galactic plane portrayed as this dangerous place. So the Milky Way as the canoe carrying the maize god to the place of creation in Orion. The canoe sinks into the primordial sea and then comes up on the other end. That happens right here. Sometimes the Milky Way is portrayed as the canoe carrying the maize god to the place of creation. See, so he goes up through the Milky Way, which is the plane of the galaxy. Then it sinks into the primordial sea and comes up on the other side of this dark rift. This is the maize god. This is a jaguar paddler, stingray paddler, paddling and protecting the maize god as he goes around the zodiac. But then he sinks in the primordial sea and comes up on the other side. This is another sort of rebirth myth. We can see these same things in Christian myth. The galactic plane is seen as the river of life that supports numerous trees. In Revelations 22:2, and on either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. Gee, what do you think that means? And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. I mean, is this literally astrology or what? I mean, the Bible is so much about astrology. It's incredible that astrology has been relegated to some sort of heresy. I mean, it's so much about astrology, it's not even funny. On either side of the river there was a tree of life bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. 12 months, 12 zodiac signs. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. In Genesis 2:16-17, it says, and the Lord commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but not from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat from it you shall surely die. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how these myths, at the very end, I'm going to talk about how these myths were interpreted, or I think misinterpreted, as I said in the beginning, as this is the good one, this is the bad one, when really they're just meant to show the nature of life. But this is, of course, the famous, eat from any tree of the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, when we look at Adam and Eve, again, this is just a general portrayal. But we've seen many where there's a serpent in a tree, there's a serpent on the ground, there's a serpent in the tree talking to Eve. Adam and Eve are, again, under these trees, and we see, that was a literal description from the book of Revelations that there's a river of life that runs through creation, and the trees. How did it go again? On either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. So it went around the tree, or it how to say it again? Either side of the river. So that either side, the plane of the galaxy goes up through the center of the zodiac. On either side, see, it kind of contradicts. On either side was like there's one tree on either side. So it's kind of a contradictory, but then it says bearing 12 fruits, so it's obviously that what's going through the middle is the river, and then the tree surrounds it. Adam and Eve are clearly related to the astrology sign of Gemini. Again, it's the same energetics, especially when you consider in Vedic astrology the sign is actually called Maituna, which means sex. The serpent tempting them from both underground, crawling on its belly, and often depicted as living in a tree is also quite literal. Look, you could easily say these are like the hero twins, although they're fallen heroes. And at the bottom of that, like we have Gemini at the top, Sagittarius at the bottom, the gods of the underworld, especially when you look at when you look at the Mayan myth. You have the hero twins at the top having to do battle with the gods of the underworld. In Christian myth, it's literally you have heaven up top and hell at the bottom. Literally. The same symbolism. Where the scorpion lives at the base of the tree in the Mayans, this is where you have hell. This is where you have the serpent tempting Eve. And tempting the hero twins, or tempting the two good ones. We have two good ones and bad ones. Again, we have good and bad. At the tree, there's always a tree. Sometimes it's a water, there's a river. Now in Christian myth they say that. Sometimes a serpent's crawling on his belly in the Christian myth, which isn't so unusual because you have the same kind of thing which would be depicted like a scorpion. It's a reptile. Well, it's actually an arachnid, but it's the same kind of imagery. It's clear to see. You literally have twins again. And this is where you have Gemini, you have the twin Picaris, now you have Adam and Eve, twins, forces of masculine and feminine, forces of duality, trying to represent the sun and moon create life on earth, masculine, feminine, hero twins. Duality, our life is a product of duality. Again, I go into much more of the symbolism in the 10-hour course that I taught. But again, Adam and Eve are clearly related to the astrology sign of Gemini, especially when you consider in Vedic astrology, the sign is actually called Maituna, which means sex. Again, we see that also in the Picaris of the Mayans. The serpent tempting them from both underground, crawling on his belly, and often depicted as living in a tree, is also quite literal. The cross. There's so much overlooked metaphysics in Christianity, it's almost hard to know where to begin to tie it all together. But certainly the cross is a symbol of the zodiac, the 4 seasons, and our connection to the sky. Come on, Christmas. Everybody knows it really probably wasn't Jesus' birthday. It's the winter solstice when the sun is reborn in the sky. Literally, the birth of the Son of Christ. Christ is almost literally the cross as well. But the sun is born on the solstice because it's when the sun rises again in the sky. It's a literal thing. Easter, very close to the solstice, when the sun is in the northern hemisphere for the next 6 months again. There's so many literal translations. Jesus had 12 disciples, 12 astrology signs. Why 12? This is why I wonder if Jesus ever really existed. Maybe he was a figure, but Jesus is so symbolic. There's so much archetype with Jesus. Many great saints have said that Jesus really existed, so I believe it, but I don't know if I believe anything about the stories around him. 12, it's just too coincidental. There's 12 astrology signs, and the sun, and the 12 disciples. I mean, it seems to be too symbolic and archetypal. So again, different but the same. The Pleiades has a handful of corn seeds. I already mentioned this. The maize god was born there. In the Mayans, the Pleiades is where our sun was born. It's the same energy. Our god was born from the Pleiades energy. In Mayans, they say the maize god, that the Pleiades is a bunch of seeds that gives birth to the maize god. So we have to look deeper in these stories than just, well, there's a good one, there's a bad one. This is the problem often. This is why in Vedic teaching, in Christian teaching, there's the good ones and there's the bad ones. This meant to indicate that to some extent that we need to follow the rule of God and the rule of law here. But these stories symbolize how life is. This is my feeling. Not necessarily that there are good ones and bad ones. The churning of the milk ocean myth, the Asuras were necessary to churn. So a few deeper mystical implications. The serpent in all of these is the Kundalini. What's called the Kundalini in Indian energetics. The deeper energy forces compelling us higher and tempting our stable, obedient life, and showing the necessary disobedience here on earth if we're going to evolve. It's also related to the misunderstanding of Rudra in the Prajapati myth, which I'm not explaining here. I explain it in my 10-hour course in great detail, because this is the big story of creation myth through the Vedic nakshatras is the story of Rudra and Prajapati and the birth of creation as shown from one nakshatra to the next, one star to the next. But the Kundalini energy is related to a serpent. In Vedic energetics, it's the deeper energy forces that connect us to the source. Unfortunately, the only system we can really study completely is the Indian one. We just get bits and pieces from others because their metaphysics aren't really as intact. The story of the Asuras and Devas turning the milk ocean toward a common purpose is an evolution of the serpent story in the Christian myth. Because you see the serpent is tempting them to drink from the tree of knowledge of life. Of the knowledge of good and evil. He's saying, no, drink from the tree, or eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then when he does, and when they do, they're cast out of the Garden of Eden. But this is just a metaphor of how we lose our innocence. But we have to lose our innocence in life. We can't incarnate in the world and not develop the knowledge of good and evil. It's why we're here. It doesn't mean that the knowledge of good and evil in itself was the wrong thing to do. It just means that is what kicked us out of the innocence of heaven. And heaven is innocence. Because as soon as they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they realized they were naked and covered themselves. They developed a knowledge of shame. But we have to pass through this in life. That's why we incarnate, is to take experience and test our own knowledge of good and evil. Do we really know this is good or evil, or do we have to take experience in it? So the Christian myth stops in this place of judgment. And so do many of the Indian stories, but like I say here, in the story proper, the Asuras are portrayed as the bad ones. Similarly, most interpretations of the Adam and Eve story keep the devil serpent as the bad one who ruined it for us all. But these characters are simply meant to illustrate how life is on Earth, similar to the Rudra story, again, which I tell in the course that I taught in Mexico. This mistake is not meant to say that Rudra was wrong. It's to show the nature of how life is on Earth. We come here on Earth to lose our innocence and eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and then test if that's really what it is. This is what we do. The story of the churning of the milk ocean illustrates that in great 3D. And the hero twins myth of the Popol Vuh of the Mayans is also a very developed story of how life plays out. And the hero twins keep tricking the gods of the underworld to have creation keep reestablishing itself. And they actually reenact this at what's called the ball game. In the Mayan culture, they reenacted this story in the ball game. So the Christian God wanted utopia, just like the Vedic God did, by fornicating with his most beautiful daughter. This is in the Prajapati and Rudra myth that I told in Mexico and showed how it plays out through the nakshatras. Instead, we come here and perish and physically die, and our life force, which is the kundalini or the serpent, is either replenished or dissipated, often through the good, bad thinking and mistakes that accompany this limited frame of reference. So because we come here and just get enamored with the illusion of the senses and forget those deeper energy currents, our life force dissipates. And all those stories of creation about the boat sinking as it goes through the galactic plane, and the hero twins shot out of the tree and having to do battle with the gods of the underworld, and the churning of the milk ocean and the good, the gods and demons, these aren't just metaphors for how life was created on Earth. They're metaphors for our life. Churning the milk ocean means if we're going to really understand the deeper levels of our being, there's going to be a lot of poison that gets dredged up, and we need Lord Shiva to protect us from the incineration of looking into our own mind. If we're going to pass through the story, pass through innocence to experience in the Christian myth, then we're going to be kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Innocence is bliss, right? Is what they say? Because we don't have any knowledge of good and evil. It's better, sometimes they say it's better to not know all this bad stuff. Well, but it's better to not know it, but then we're going to remain ignorant and childish. So if we're going to do that, it's going to be, we're going to be tested. So the knowledge, the illusion of good and evil is the matrix which dissipates that powerful energy as well. So this is also the deeper level, is that once we get the knowledge of good and evil, most of our energy gets hung up in this judgment. And this is what I wanted to say about how to interpret these myths. Rather than let your mind get so hung up in the judgment of it, well, there's the good one and the bad one. See it as a parable of how life actually works. Because we get so hooked into the good-bad, the duality. I like this, I don't like this. The attractions and the aversions. And our life force actually drains out through that process as much as anything else. Running through the things that we like, avoiding the things we don't, because this is good, this is not. So there are many different levels of ways to interpret these myths, but they all come from the sky. And really, as I say here, sadly, only the Vedic system is complete. And I've put together a course that I just taught in Mexico. I've just put it together so you can get it on DVD. 8 DVDs, actually 10-hour course, where you can get access to this whole thing.